the age of 33, you were told that you had 3 to 6 months to live.
Yeah. There was one other person who was in this room, and they were incredibly sort of ill, really. And I suddenly realised that I knew them.
And a lot of people would say, how have you come through that, Jonathan, and you're here talking to me today?
I think that's why I'm still here.
What were friends, family, or anyone that you were not talking to thinking about what had happened to Jonathan? I have to be honest with you, I was overwhelmed with the amount of questions I wanted to ask you.
Oh, wow.
And I feel like there's so much of your life I am, and people listening to this will be interested in, that it was difficult to condense this down.
Listen, it's fine. I mean, I have had an extra, I don't know how or why, but
Yeah.
I have. Well, I kind of know why.
Yeah.
I was born in 1949 when homosexuality was a criminal offence.
Yeah.
And I went to drama school in September 1967, and on the 27th of July 1967, homosexuality was partially decriminalised.
Right.
But the wording of the act was between consenting adult males over the age of 21 in private.
Right.
Which meant I was still illegal because I was 18.
Yeah.
And so whether it was in private or not, it would still be a criminal offence. But I still had fun. In private meant that if you shared a flat with someone and you dragged somebody back, again, you were breaking the law. And there were lots of cases where the police raided
Wow.
people's homes,
My God.
you know, because they still wanted to stamp on it.
And what was the penalty in 1949 when it was illegal outright?
Oh, jail.
Jail.
And my partner, Nigel, did go to jail.
We're already getting straight into this, but
I know.
First I just want to say thank you, Jonathan, so much for taking the time to sit with me.
Pleasure. A pleasure.
I believe this is one of, if not the most important interview that I've done so far. You have been referred to as one of the first people in the UK to be diagnosed with HIV. Is that correct?
Well, I was one of the first people that was diagnosed with a virus.
A virus.
It didn't, HIV didn't become, the term wasn't used until I think it was like 1988.
Right.
In a way, I kind of think that it's important, but I also think that it's important because we're going to talk about HIV.
Yes.
Obviously.
Yeah.
And I just think that it is really important that people understand, you know, yes, what it was like, and it was horrendous back in those early years, but where we've got to now is extraordinary.
Yeah.
So, you know, so to talk about that, I'm really happy to talk about that.
Good, because I think what's important to remember is this is recent history.
Yeah.
And
very recent.
You and me are sat on the same couch right now. I'm 33. You're 75.
And I was 33
Yes.
when I
Yeah.
got my diagnosis.
Yeah. Why is it important to keep talking about that period of time during the AIDS epidemic?
I think because there is still a huge amount of misinformation that is peddled, that because the right-wing press in this country, and of course in the States, but, you know, I'm talking about this country because it's my experience, weaponized it and used it to attack gay men. So suddenly, have you seen the Don't Die of Ignorance campaign video?
Yeah.
Which specifically says, this is a virus, you know, John Voight's doom-laden voice, but it specifically says, this is a virus, it can affect anybody. But the press weaponized it, and suddenly it was gay men. And, you know, that did such a disservice to everybody else, women, heterosexuals, what have you. And still, there is this perception that if you're heterosexual, it doesn't affect you. And at the moment, we're in a situation where actually it is young women and heterosexual men, and they're the most difficult ones to get hold of.
When you were first diagnosed with HIV in 1982, they gave you, was it the term or the name, L1?
I had always assumed that L1 stood for London 1, so that I was the first patient at the Middlesex Hospital that was diagnosed with a virus. Can I go back?
Yeah,
because how I got to the Middlesex Hospital. In 1981, I was invited, a very dear friend of mine was getting married. She was from San Francisco, so she was getting married in San Francisco. I had a dear friend who I had lived with in London. He had been a teacher, gave up teaching, became a copywriter, won all kinds of awards, like in his first year of being a copywriter, and decided that he was going to go to San Francisco because there was this extraordinary sort of experiment happening with gay men living openly. And he felt that he wanted to experience this. My friend George Hodson, my friend Deborah, and her soon-to-be or husband Jeremy wanted their gay friends to come. And in Jewish weddings, you have ushers as opposed to bridesmaids. And so there were 5 of their gay friends who came over to be ushers. What is slightly terrifying is that I'm the only one that's left. You know, all the others basically died. 3 certainly around AIDS related.
Right.
This is one we're not sure. So I went to San Francisco and had an amazing time, and then came back, and I was working as an actor, but when I was out of work, I used to work at a place called Joe Allen, and I reached a point that every single lymph node was beginning to swell in my body. And this is sort of round about sort of August, September of 1982. I made an appointment to see my GP in the East End. And I remember I was walking like a gorilla. I was got my arms up in kimbo because every single lymph node in my body had erupted. My legs were kind of sort of, I was bow-legged because in the groin, they were all up and they were all painful. Anyway, as I walked into the GP's room, she got up and she said, "Shake my hand." And as I shook her hand, she felt the lymph node in the crook of my arm. I went, "Ow, what'd you do that for? It's painful." She said, "That's the sailor's handshake." Whenever the sailors would go into port, they would shake the hands of the women or the men they were going with. And if that lymph node was up, it was a sign of syphilis. So she said, "Have you had a syphilis test recently?" So I said, "Well, I've had syphilis, but no, I haven't." So she said, "I suggest you go and have one." So I used to go to James Pringle House, which was part of the Middlesex Hospital. That was their sexual health clinic. So the next day, down I went to the James Pringle House, and they were all over me. And they wanted to take a biopsy. So they put me in a side ward. And in those days, it seemed if you were queer, you were put in side wards so the homosexuality wouldn't spread throughout the hospital. It was kind of like you were being put into some quarantine zone.
Okay.
You know. And, you know, what they were doing was doing a biopsy.
Yeah.
They took a biopsy out of one of the lymph nodes that was just sort of up here in my chest.
Yeah.
But I was made to wait 2 days in that sort of side room.
Oh, you were there for 2 days?
I was there in this room.
And what were the thoughts going through your head? Were you just complete confusion?
Well, yeah. And what was even more sort of confusing and kind of worrying was the fact that there was one other person who was in this room, and they were incredibly, incredibly sort of ill, really. And I suddenly realized that I knew them. It was just so weird that he's there, and then they come and tell me 2 days later that I have a virus. There is no cure. I've got between 3 and 9 months to live, and I'm 33, and there will be palliative care. And I'm thinking, why are you telling me about palliative care? I'm 33. But basically, my life was over.
Mm.
And then I could go home. And I don't even remember how I got back to my flat. But I do remember just getting in and closing the door and just collapsing. And I didn't get in touch with people. I mean, I just cut myself off. And then I realized that I actually needed to be around people. So I would go off to the bars in the East End, and I would sort of, stand in the darkest corner, wanting to be with people, but absolutely not wanting to engage, because what are you going to say? I mean, I felt like a modern day leper. I mean, it was awful. It was awful. And every so often I would sort of, pick up a copy of Capital Gay, and Capital Gay was one of the sort of the gay newspapers that was beginning to start talking about what was happening, because there was so much misinformation beginning to be put around sort of, by the press. And at this point, we haven't even got to the Don't Die of Ignorance, because that didn't happen till 1987.
Mm.
But already, it's being called GRID, gay-related
Right.
immune deficiency.
Right.
So already this is being weaponized.
So in the mainstream press, would they refer to it as the gay plague?
Yeah.
So you would read headlines.
You would read headlines. It was horrible. It was really, really sort of awful. And that continued. That, and that's why, that when the Don't Die of Ignorance campaign came, and they were able to, the press was able to leap on it, because now this is being shown, in cinemas, on television. There is a leaflet that goes to every household in the country.
I just want to pause for a second, because you've said a lot there.
Yeah.
And
you can unpick it.
Yeah, I need to unpick it. I think that the one thing that, the age of 33, you were told that you had 3 to 6 months to live.
Yeah.
That is the thing.
3 to 9 months.
3 to 9 months.
Anyway, yeah.
That is the same age as me now.
Yeah, yeah.
And in some regards, I feel like my life has just started.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's just how I felt, that one had got one's whole life in front of me, and suddenly you haven't.
When you were speaking to medical team at the time, obviously there was no understanding of what was going on. But
no.
was there any medication or any supplements or anything they said, take this, try this? There was nothing. It was just you're on your own.
At that point, there was nothing. You were on your own.
Right.
But what they were doing. So every so often they would ring me up and they would ask me to go in to have a brain scan, an MRI scan.
Okay.
Because they wanted to see whether or not this virus could, break through the blood-brain barrier.
Okay.
So, basically get into the brain.
And at what point were you getting wind of other queer people talking about this? Your friends, peers, people overseas?
People, I mean, they weren't initially, but then, of course, they did. And in the States, I mean, they were just amazing. and that's what ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition,
Yeah.
was all about. And it basically, started in New York and San Francisco, where they were battling to get medication. We had a National Health Service. So when eventually medication started coming, we got access to it.
Yeah, well, they say that if HIV was affecting straight people in the same way it was gay people back then, it would have been handled very differently.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you would have...
they
would have been jumping on it.
They would have been jumping on it. And no. I mean, we were kind of expendable. I mean, to me, it must have felt like, troops in the trenches in the First World War.
And was there any? I know that there's no internet, there's no forums, there's no online community. Being gay is even socially unacceptable in itself, regardless of AIDS.
Well, it was beginning. This was the whole thing. It was beginning to become acceptable. And that, I think, is really why the press weaponized it.
Yeah.
So here we were, carrying this plague, carrying this deadly disease, and there were people that wanted us to be put into concentration camps or put onto islands to be removed from society. And that was, it was a bit like the way that when Brexit started happening and they were talking about, suddenly it was fine to be racist. It was fine to hate foreigners. I can't. It just makes me so angry, the way that people can behave.
Was there any togetherness with other gay men who were going through the same thing at the time? So when you first got diagnosed in 82, and then as the years and months went by, did you find any solidarity amongst other men going through a similar thing?
Oh, listen, if it wasn't for gay men and in particular, for instance, the friends of Terry Higgins. Terry Higgins was one of the first people who died, and he died in July 1982. So he died before I was diagnosed, but it was never recognized. It was only, later that it was recognized what had killed him. And it was his friends who got together to form the Terence Higgins Trust, because there was nothing, there was no information, there was nowhere that one could get. So that was one of the first places that started, and bit by bit, there were other organisations that started. So there was the place that I used to go to in South London called the Landmark, and Jonathan Grimshaw was one of the sort of the creators of that. And then there were the body positives, but they were basically started in the main by gay men, or people who were affected, so friends of, which is extraordinary.
And how was that for you to be around those people at the time, when you must have felt so alone?
Well, you see, what was interesting was that I was basically pretty isolated, because I just wasn't getting in touch with people. And then, so say, there used to be this newspaper called Capital Gay. So they would be having all, giving you proper information about what was happening. So when I would go to the bars, I would sort of, pick up a copy and take it home and read it. And we got to December, and I just decided that actually, there wasn't going to be any cure. What was in front of me was so horrible that I decided that I was going to end it. And I really wasn't quite sure how I was going to do it. But essentially, I decided that I would do it what I called the Roman way. So I was going to run a hot bath. I was going to take some pills, take some alcohol, and just slit my wrists and bleed out in the warm water, because what I'd read was that it was, less painful, in warm water. And, I'd got it all planned, and that's what I was going to do. And then the voice of my mother, Golda, rang in my head saying, Jonathan, you clear up your own mess. You don't leave it for others to clear up after you. And I just thought, I can't do it. What am I going to do? Nice Jewish boy, can't kill myself. So you better get on and live. But how am I going to do that? And again, capital Gay rode into the rescue, because I remember picking up a copy and there was this tiny little advertisement. Gays for a nuclear-free future are running a coach on the first Saturday, the 1st of April, 1983, going to join a stand together around Greenham Common, which was the American air base and the women's camp, and Burfield and Aldermaston that were the two British nuclear establishment. And they wanted to form, CND wanted to form a human chain. So Gays for a Nuclear-Free Future are going to run a coach, leaving from Gays the Word at 11 o'clock. And I thought, all right, this is going to be my re-entry into society. I'm going to go. And I remember girding my loins and leaving my flat in Shadwell and jumping on the train at Shadwell, going to Russell Square. And I remember coming out at Russell Square and I could see the coach outside Gaze the Word, and I was sort of walking up to it and I suddenly thought, what the am I doing here?
Right, okay.
And I was about to turn round to flee, and this voice goes, hello, my name's Nigel, who are you? I stopped in my tracks and I swung round and I see this young guy wearing green Wellington boots, crimson and ochre pantaloons, this crimson Fair Isle singlet and this mop of black curly hair. And that was Nigel Young. And I just went, oh, Jonathan. And we walked off to the coach together. I mean, it was just, we had the most amazing day. And at the end of it, Noel Gregg from Gay Sweatshop said everybody back to his place for like an impromptu party in West Hampstead. And we went there for a bit, and then I was knackered. I wanted to go home. I was tired. So I said to him, why didn't you come for tea to my place tomorrow, the next day? So off I went, and then the next day he arrives with a bunch of anemones and 2 jam donuts. So he's brought tea. And he said, you're living isolated in the East End. I'm living in North London. I know of a squat in Brixton. I also know someone who would like to, take over or rent your flat. Let's move in together. And I just thought, I'm going to be dead in a few months. Why not? I liked him. So we did.
Wow.
I mean, it's just, which is crazy. But like...
Then you were together for decades.
Eventually, almost 39 years.
Yeah. So I want to just go back slightly.
Yeah.
And talking about that period of your life when you were isolating yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What were friends, family, or anyone that you were not talking to thinking about what had happened to Jonathan, that he'd suddenly become so isolated?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, at some point, I must have got in touch with my younger brother. I told him of my diagnosis because when I got ill, and I knew I was going to get ill, I was going to die, basically. When I got ill, he would be able to explain to my parents exactly, what was going on, because there was so much misinformation.
And what was his reaction? Do you remember that conversation?
Well, he was concerned, but he understood what he'd got to do.
Right.
Because I was sort of, putting a huge weight on him, basically.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't going to tell them. I thought, they dealt with my coming out. It's enough.
Yeah. Okay.
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 So that was that.
And can I ask you about the the feeling in medical settings? I'm presuming that you would go for checkups, right?
Yeah.
During this period. So
It was
how were you treated in medical settings?
it was amazing. What was fantastic was that there was so much kind of ignorance is the wrong word, but they just didn't know.
Yeah.
So it was a learning process. So the kind of relationship that I had with my consultant, initially sort of, at James Pringle House or at the Middlesex Hospital, Professor Weller, was amazing because we were learning, so they were learning, which is why one was being brought in to have, MRI scans and what have you.
So earlier you mentioned that you felt like a leper almost, but within the hospital, not so much.
No, but I, in terms of, the social setting, I felt like a leper.
The period of 1982
Yeah.
to 1996,
Yeah.
when effective treatment came in,
Yeah.
that you could look at you and think, so many people lost their lives during that time.
I know.
And a lot of people would say, how have you come through that, Jonathan? And you're here talking to me today.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And I said to my HIV consultant, I would like to give my body to science. And he said, they don't want it. Yeah, that's what he said.
And so they were giving you no explanation as to why you're doing well. And
no. But what I didn't do was I didn't touch AZT. What happened was that
that's the cancer drug, is it, that they were giving to people?
It was the failed chemotherapy drug.
Right.
Yeah. And they have this thing called the Concord trial, where they are going to trial AZT. And they basically say, we take a cohort and we cut it in half, and one half gets the pill and the other half gets the placebo. And I said, well, hold on a minute. Do you pair us up? So someone who's got a similar build or metabolism to me, we're paired up and one of us gets the pill and the other gets the placebo. And they went, oh, no, that's far too complicated. And I just saw red. I got a bit belligerent. I said, well, now, you put a board down the middle of me and you give one half of me the pill and the other half the placebo. That, I think, is a trial. But if you can't be bothered to pair us up, I can't be bothered to do that trial. And I think that because I never touched AZT, I think that's why I'm still here.
Wow. I mean, you mustn't have been alone in that. There must have been other people that that didn't.
There were some people that eventually I have met who were so nauseated by the medication that they took themselves off and they survived. But any of the people that, and there were a lot of people who, were seriously really ill.
Yeah.
So anything that was there, they would, they jumped at it.
You had a friend, George.
Yeah.
And he, similarly to you,
he
made it through that period.
He absolutely not only made it through that period, he had dealt with 4 cancers in the process of making it through. He only died last year.
Wow.
I mean, just extraordinary. Whereas his partner, Sampan, he took AZT and he died.
Can we talk about the changes in attitudes towards sex whilst AIDS was happening? So before, you were saying you were going to bathhouses. There was this almost celebration of gay sex
absolutely
beforehand, but then obviously once this, since 1982, what was the change?
Well, suddenly, I mean, bathhouses were closed down, saunas were closed down. There were, I mean, it didn't happen. There were just, the attitudes towards it were just,
and the fear, obviously,
and the fear,
yeah.
And I mean, I was afraid.
Are your parents still alive?
No.
Did they ever know about all of this that was happening?
No.
The isolation?
No.
Did you ever have a chance to tell them? Or
No. I never sort of that part of it, I never told them.
Right. Okay.
And I never told them that I was HIV positive.
Right. I've got a couple more questions
Yeah.
on the 14 years before you started effective treatment.
Right.
Was there ever a time, as you've said, it's amazing that you made it through, and did you ever have a time when your, I don't know what the right language for this is, but your viral load was pushing towards...
Yeah. What happened, it wasn't about viral load because we didn't know about viral loads.
So how would you
viral load
articulate it?
didn't viral load testing didn't come till 1997, but it was the CD4 count that was the barometer.
Right.
And when my CD4 count, so when I was at Mortimer Market, I reached a point, and it was about 1989, and my CD4 count slumped to 200.
Okay.
And that was an AIDS diagnosis. And I absolutely freaked because I had not done the Concord trial, I was considered a difficult patient. And so I used to go to a place called the Landmark. I went there and I was saying to people, I don't know what to do. I need to find a new HIV consultant. And I just don't know. And someone said, oh, I've got this wonderful consultant at King's College Hospital. So I make an appointment to go and see Chris Taylor. And when I go and see him, I'm talking about sort of, my history, and he's got all the notes there, what have you. And he listens to me and he says, okay, he said, let's see if you can try Septrin. So Septrin is this inexpensive, like, a pound a tablet, inexpensive antibiotic, which if you can tolerate it, that will keep PCP at bay. And then there was the acyclovir, because I kept getting shingles. So he said, we put you on acyclovir prophylactically. So from basically 1990 to 1996, that's what I was on.
And that kept you...
And that seemed to keep me going,
Right.
Basically what had happened was that I'd met Nigel in 83, and Nigel was always very politically active. He'd been part of a group called Gay Left, and Gay Left had created this magazine called Gay Left, which was a socialist, Trotskyist, far left magazine.
Yeah.
So he was politically active. So when the miners' strike started in 1984, it was obvious that we would get involved. And there was this group called Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Miners, LGSM. And so we joined it. And for me, that was just amazing.
Well, I feel that we could do a whole second podcast just on your involvement with Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners.
Oh God, yeah.
I feel like there's too much to go into.
Oh, okay, yeah. But well, so anyway, so having dealt with Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Miners, so been involved with that, which was just extraordinary. And there's several podcasts. My way of dealing with my virus or my HIV was not dealing with it, was keeping busy.
You've said a few times during this period, I won't be alive
in
a couple of years or a couple of months. So you were just living in a constant thought of that.
Always living, in the present. That's it. Not, I would, we would plan for things to happen in the future because it's always good to have something to look forward to.
Can I ask you before 1981?
Right.
Being gay in the 70s.
Yeah.
It's such a interesting prospect for somebody now at my age to imagine what it would have been like to be gay then. Would you say that it was fun? Were you having a good time?
Yeah. I mean, one was having a good time, and it was sort of possible to have a good time. But it was also difficult. I mean, because although it was legal, it took a while, to get to 21, so I was legal. And still, the priests were pretty, unrelenting.
And how were you meeting men sexually?
Oh, one would go to bars, and then bit by bit, dance clubs started. So I remember there was a place called Mandy's on Henrietta Street in Covent Garden. And you could dance, but if you danced too close, the bouncers would come and part you, because the law states consenting adult males over the age of 21 in private, and you ain't in private.
It amazes me then that the bars were even allowed to be.
Well, the bars could be, because, that was fine. You weren't having sex in the bars. Well, you might do, but for the most part, you weren't having sex. You might be having sex in the cottages and in the bars, but basically,
And was there great fear turning up to one of these bars?
There wasn't great fear. The fear was much more when you left the bars, because they were gay bars and there were queer bashers around, and people were being queer bashed.
Have you seen It's a Sin?
Oh,
Channel
yeah.
4.
Yeah.
So there's a really emotional monologue where Ollie Alexander's character is in bed talking to his mother. And I just want to read a quote. He says, that's what people will forget, that it was so much fun, when he describes his memories of his lovers before contracting the virus. I think it was a really powerful line, because what we might think is that gays were living this horrendous life.
No, we had an amazing time. I mean, and that was one of the things, that suddenly this virus comes, and suddenly there is all this fear around. They were wretched times. But they were also at the same time amazing. And I was really lucky, because I had met this person. And, I always say that Nigel gave me a life, because I can't imagine what would have happened if that had not happened. I can't,
When you say amazing times, when you think fondly back to some amazing times, what memories come up?
Well, there used to be, with friends, we would go and we would rent cottages in North Wales and go walking in the hills. So it's like, sharing those good times. We would always go away, 6 or 7 of us, to a cottage, somewhere for Christmas, and spend Christmas together. And then, by being part of LGSM, the connections that there were, from there. So whenever you would go on another demonstration, there would always be members of LGSM.
I want to ask you about your views on, when you look at younger gay people now. So, for instance, my age, people younger than me even, 21. I was at a music festival recently in Sydney, and I was there amongst so many queer people and thinking, oh my God, I'm so lucky to be able to be here and just party and have a good time, and this to be the norm, and to not think about it, and to have so much silly fun available to me, and the films and the music and Drag Race, all of these things. And my age group owe so much to people your age. When you see people my age now, what do you make of it all?
Oh, I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. What I worry about is, and I think that's something that is more about my generation, is that they don't know their history. And I think it is really important that we know our history, because, it's not written down. Yes, it's beginning to be written down, people are beginning to write sort of, memoirs and books. But essentially, there's a lot that isn't shared because people never thought about it or didn't, or we as elders, didn't share it, or and I think that's important. So doing something like this is important, so people begin to be able to sort of know their history.
Could you imagine you could live in the same time as such a radical change in rights and culture?
No, but also, that's one of these amazing things. For instance, as a result of lesbian and gay men support the miners, supporting this community in South Wales, that, for instance, South Wales miners put pressure on the National Union of Miners to use their block vote to get lesbian and gay rights into the Labour Party manifesto in 1985. And the National Union of Miners got other unions to also do the same thing, and they did. And it got into the Labour Party manifesto. So when Tony Blair, in 1997, eventually became, there was a Labour government, eventually we got civil partnerships. But civil partnerships only came about because of trade unions. And, that is something which people don't talk about, don't know. In the same way, for instance, that because of viral load testing in 1997, if there hadn't been viral load testing, there would be no PCR tests for COVID. Is that ever talked about? No, it isn't.
No.
There are all these sort of, secrets or hidden bits of history which are just not talked about or not known because these connections are not made.
What do you think is a particularly important thing for young queer people to remember, do you think? If you were to talk to a 16 to 25-year-old and be like, this is something you mustn't forget about our history.
Well, I think that basically Stonewall was a riot. It wasn't a party. It was a riot. It was a battle. And what was amazing was that allies came. So Stonewall basically was a bar basically for trans folk. And the trans folk are always and still are considered the lowest of the low. The way that people talk about trans is exactly the same way as they used to talk about gay men back in the 60s. And in a way nothing changes, and that's what is so shocking. The way that people can, they're pecking orders. But I think that it's really important that people know that it was a riot. The police had attacked because it was an easy target. So they went for the bar where the trans were. And they'd had enough of it, and they fought back. And when they fought back, the dykes and the leather bars, they emptied and they came and joined. So it's really important that people know their history. And, not just from this country, but, Stonewall was a riot.
And don't take for granted when you're at that music festival,
No,
when you're watching Drag Race on TV.
Absolutely,
The only reason that's possible is because of
it's
this.
because people have battled for it.
Yeah.
And in this country, people battled and have fought. And so, don't take it for granted, because it can go just like that. And, just watch. Let's see what's going to happen in America. Because, it's going to be rough. The next 4 years are going to be very rough for trans people. They're going to be very rough, on gay men. It's not going to be a picnic.
I've got some closing quick-fire questions for you.
Ooh.
So, some are more emotional than others. We'll start with, what do you think's been the happiest period in your life so far?
Oh, I think that that's so difficult. But I think, the meeting with Nigel Young, knowing Nigel, has to top the bill.
If you could be teleported back to one party, which party would it be?
1985 Gay Pride, when we led with the minors. There's been a gay men support the minors, because that changed everything.
Mm.
That was just, there are 5 podcasts there to tell you, because that was such, I think that was just the most extraordinary time, because who would believe it?
Couple more quick questions. Do you have a favourite photograph from your life?
Oh, favourite. I mean, I do have a favourite photograph, but I don't own the rights to it.
What is it?
It is of me with Mike Jackson holding the banner of Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Minors, which was huge and heavy, made of canvas, not easy to hold, and with Nigel in the middle, and then you can see the one of the Welsh miners' banners in the background. I mean, I just think beautiful. It's a photograph. Colin Clues, he took it. Yeah.
Do you have this at home?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
If you could live your life all over again and choose whether you wanted to have been born gay, would you?
Oh God, yeah.
Okay, love that.
Oh yes. I just think that I have been amazingly fortunate to have been born when I was born, and then all these things have just seemingly fallen in my lap.
So would you not have wanted to have been a young gay man born in the 2000s? Were you very happy to have lived that period?
Oh yeah, God. Oh no, I think that what young people have to deal with now is hellish.
In what way?
Because you've got climate change to deal with, and people ain't talking about it. But, what really sort of my parents' generation didn't do, or did do, and what they have left. And in a way, my generation kind of went with it.
Yeah.
It is, your generation and the younger ones who are really battling it, and making it an issue, which it needs to be. So, I'm so pleased that I was born when I was born, and what I've had to deal with, as it's been at times problematical, but I've been just incredibly fortunate.
Well, Jonathan, we have to wrap it up.
Fair enough.
But I can't thank you enough for coming here and for telling your story and for talking about some difficult memories, but also sharing some really amazing ones with me.
Pleasure.
And you are a national treasure.
Oh, Lord.
Honestly, it was a pleasure.
I thank you. Thank you.